welcome to the Greater New Orleans Foundation. My name is Andy Copeland. I'm the president and CEO, and we are thrilled to have you here and thrilled to be able to bring Bryan Clontz to talk a little bit about the work that we collectively do. So before I get started, I want to acknowledge in the back getting a cold drink, one of our board members, David Edwards. And so thank you, David. And I think we've had a few have others in the room ever been on our board? No. Well, Alex Gershanik is also on the board. I forgot that I had seen you as well. So welcome and John Becker, who previously served on our board. So thank you. And then where's Larry Lehman from the Cornerstone Council and other members of the Cornerstone Council who have been here and past. And Carol, you were also on our board here at the past board or past Cornerstone Council? Carol was a former advisory Impact 100. Yes, okay. The current chair of Impact 100, Carol Neff. So thank you, Carol. We've got our vice president for organizational effectiveness, Aaron McQuaid, right here, and we've got donor relations. Yeah, man, Paul just mentioned that we got lots of chocolate here. So clearly, I need to eat a few more pieces and make sure I'm on my game. We also have Allie Betts, who's our Senior Philanthropic Gifts Manager in the back. Jilla Tombar, who's our Strategic Partnerships Officer. We have Jessica Ventrella, yeah, and I want to make sure I get that pronunciation right, who's our Controller. And so, do we have anybody else from the staff here? Did I miss? Okay. Before I make any further mistakes, let me just say welcome to all of you. You all are our most important partners in the work that we do to try to help folks fulfill their charitable goals. And so one of Aaron's goals as our VP of Donor Relations is to help try to increase the programming that we provide for financial advisors, estate planners, and other folks in the business of helping people with their charitable aspirations. And so this is one of those exercises that we're going to try to provide more of to make sure that when you think about how to help best meet your clients' needs around their charitable giving, that you think of the Greater New Orleans Foundation as your partner. We aim to have spectacular donor services for your clients and hopefully our fund holders. And so whether they're trying to do a planned gift, whether they're trying to set up a donor advised fund, whether they're working to liquidate a complex asset, we want to be the first folks that you think of here in the New Orleans area because we're your community foundation, we're your community partners, and we're going to be here for the long run, trying to make a better difference to make the Greater New Orleans region vibrant, sustainable, and just for all. And really, we can only do that with the support of our fund holders and by building those assets that are dedicated to this place that we call home. So thank you all so much for being here. We're thrilled to have you. We're thrilled to have Bryan Clontz, who you all know as one of the nation's experts. He's certainly earned his chops in his previous engagements with the United Way of Greater Atlanta, with the Boys and Girls Clubs as their planned giving director nationally, as the VP for advancement at the Atlanta Community Foundation. But since that time, he's been taking all of those things that he learned over the years and has been offering consulting services to lots of organizations around philanthropy and developing his own companies that help manage illiquid asset donations. And he is both an expert and an engaging speaker. Patty says that she's known him since he was a hot shot in the 90s, and he's still a hot shot. And again, we're just thrilled that you're here, and we're thrilled to be able to bring Bryan Clontz to you this afternoon. So Bryan,
thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Bring my water with me. Patty knew me when I had hair. I had so much hair. I would actually have to pay people to cut off my surplus hair like once a month or so. Now it's nothing, but anyway. Well, I'm glad to be here. So I've got the visit here today, a little bit of time with the staff tomorrow, and then I go to Lake Charles, which I know is a long way away, all day on Thursday. So it'll be my sort of next part of the trip. So if you're not fun today, I'm going to badmouth you across the whole state. So we'll sort of start with that premise. So what I hope to do is to go through charitable planning under the new tax laws. We'll talk about some things that are emerging, some interesting things that are emerging out of the new tax law as it relates to conducive charitable planning, and certainly a lot of things people perhaps did not expect would be happening. And then I'm going to spend a much more of the meat of the afternoon here to talk about charitable planning with non-cash assets, so creative ways of using non-cash assets, everything other than liquid stuff for charitable gifts too. So with that, I know you have handouts. I am very, very informal, and I really crave any interactions, any questions you have or cases you're working on or anything. I'm happy to go into that. And in fact, I would like to digress a little bit too, so I'll put that out. I know you're all very impressed by the clip art. It's very high quality clip art. So you're all walked in and it's like, wow, it's gonna be a good, very professional presentation. 100% true, I'm cheaper than anybody in this room. 100% true. And so I will not pay for clip art. So for all of you that have, kids or spouses or somebody who is actually in graphic arts, I'm the one that keeps them poor, so I'll just admit that. So I honestly think, I think this is true. It took me about maybe an hour to find free clip art, so I didn't have to pay $10. And at my billable rate, I should have paid the stupid $10, but no, I got to sit there for an hour and sort of click through. No. Then I finally find this stupid diver picture. So something about me that I don't even think Patty knows, we'll see. If I do a little word association, if I said I was raised by a pack of, what would sort of immediately jump to mind? Wolves, okay. What is the human version of a wolf? Anybody know? Human version. Human version. Werewolf? No. Hippies. Oh, our financial advisor, maybe. Yes. Hippies. Hippies are human. They live in packs and they're out in the woods and all that kind of stuff. I was raised by a pack of hippies. This is 100% true. And you're a hippie. It's like you're a redneck if. So you're a hippie. There's a 3-prong hippie test. The first prong hippie test is you had to own a Volkswagen camper with a pop-up top at some point in your life. So we did. And by the way, when we go out and camp, like as a kid, I was an only child. And so we'd stay out there like a weekend, and like all the other campers' kids were like, oh, that's cool, you're here for a weekend. And then if you're there for a week, it's like, wow, you're here all week. The 8th day became the creepy day. The 8th day was like, you're actually living out of the camper. This isn't like a camping experience. So they wouldn't let them play with me anymore. It's all true. Second thing, which is very strange, and I should shut up, but I'll never see any of you again, even though this is being recorded, which is a bigger problem. For my 3rd grade birthday, it's probably 9, my parents' pot dealer came to my birthday party and gave me a gift, and I knew him by his first name. So if your kids know your pot dealer by his or her first name, could be a hippie. Third thing, which is even stranger, and that is, you'll see why I've got these two little blocks here in a second. Also true, hippies don't spend a whole lot of time picking out godparents for their kids. So about maybe 6 years ago, not that long ago, 6 years ago, I was like flipping through this family album with my mom, and I'm like, Mom, who are these people? She goes, oh, you know who those are? I was like, I've never seen these people before in my life. She goes, those are your godparents. I said, do you have any other pictures of my godparents? No, these are your godparents. I said, these are the people that you selected to be my spiritual guides through life. Yes. So this is the picture. I kid you not. The only picture I have, and I'm thinking, oh, they're saying like, Bryan, you're godson number 1. I'm trying to, spin it. No, it gets weirder. This was their Christmas card. So it was peace on earth, goodwill toward men. This is in the middle of the mountains in North Carolina. So these are my godparents. So if I'm going through some of these conversations this afternoon, you're like, I don't think his head's screwed on very tight. These are my godparents, and I had a lot of THC wedged up in my head when I was a kid. So there you go. Everybody okay with that? Is this starting like every other professional advisor CE that you've ever gone to? It's probably pretty close. So no, about the same. All right, so we'll talk about new tax law stuff. Main thing, sort of take a bigger step back, we're seeing a huge number of gifts that are occurring. So there's a lot of very strange commentary around tax laws not incenting giving, and giving is going to go down like crazy, it's going to go off a cliff, and there's one study that says this and one study that says that. What we're seeing so far this year, is certainly for us and all of our other clients, giving is smoking. So smoking hot. So we're seeing a lot of gifts that are still occurring. Talk very briefly about the history of tax law impact. Got a little slide on that, which you probably already see. Sort of what it means from an itemizer versus non-itemizer and what that means, if anything. And then it goes a little bit more into the estate planning, life insurance, and other sort of tax planning opportunities within the new tax law itself. And again, there might be a couple hopefully clever things that are in there. Big deal is around this PEAS elimination impact. So all of you know, it used to be the phase out of itemized deductions for very high AGI earners that would dramatically reduce, in some cases, large gifts well over that AGI. And of course, the elimination of that has really opened up that whole sort of large major gift giving area too. And I'll talk about stock market appreciation, small business appreciation. Dr. Russell James at Texas Tech wrote a great piece and sort of had something I hadn't considered. He basically said as soon as the corporate income tax rate went down so much, that immediately, of course, increased the value of all small businesses and publicly traded companies, which obviously puffed the market. But his whole point there was now that you have higher appreciation long-term gain assets, in fact, that actually creates more assets for potential charitable giving, whether those are publicly traded or privately held businesses too. They would have somebody that would take a position that they held very strongly, and they would have you reverse your position and have the other person do the same thing. So I was very much an advocate for keeping the charitable income tax deduction. There was another person who was a lawyer who I was debating who was very much against retaining the charitable income tax deduction. So they switched us and we did this public debate. I cannot make this up either, but I actually really prepared his side of the argument, and I put like a 20-page paper together and I did this whole thing. He didn't prepare at all. So he lost the debate, but he won the debate. You understand what I mean? It's like I fell right into that stupid trap, like who's the idiot? Anyway, one thing though that I found very interesting, and this is sort of against the charitable income tax deduction, so I want to be a little careful how I say this, but this was one slide out of this paper that I sort of pulled, and that is when you look at overall charitable giving as it relative to GDP in this country, and you look at it, then you overlay what the highest marginal income tax bracket is. You can see here I started, just for the ease of this slide, back in 1971. That little red line there, many of you may know, that was the highest marginal income tax bracket at 70%. Oh my God. So one school of economics would say people are going to give like crazy, because if you're able to get a deduction at 70 cents on every dollar, that's a hyper subsidy, and it's only costing you 30 cents to make that gift of $1, you'd be giving like crazy. Another school of economic thought would say, no, 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 taxes are so high, that's crowding out all of your other discretionary giving. You're not going to feel wealthy, and therefore you're not going to be comfortable making gifts. And you could get two of those economists, and they would debate it, and you'd be like, yeah, you're kind of both right. This, to me, is interesting. When you then look at that, when it was 70% hyper subsidy, 70 cents on every dollar you're saving in tax, from 1971 to 1981, you then look up, and the amount of total charitable giving in this country was between 1.7 and 2.1%. Tax bracket was between 28 and 30% for a fairly extended period of time. It was almost 7 years that way, so you should be able to sort of see that flow through the system. You then go up, and you'll see it's 1.7 to 1.9%. I went back all the way to 1952, I think, 56. It was constantly about 1.8 to 2.2%, no matter what. Wars, estate tax, $600,000 exemption, no exemption, marginal tax brackets flying all over the place. My only point in all of this is we all think as advisors, and I'm including myself in this, that taxes have a whole lot more impact than they do. Nobody cares. They want to be able to make gifts, have impact for things that they are passionate about. If they can save on taxes and they can give more than otherwise they thought possible, yes, I'm with you, but that becomes sort of the gravy and the frosting to make it go, rather than actually making these charitable gifts. You all know, we're talking about the itemizers, that only about a third of people roughly were itemizing under the old Tax Act, which then meant 2/3 weren't. And then you would say, from a pure economic standpoint, then most people who should be giving would be the higher income earners. And in fact, a huge number of gifts were occurring at the 2/3 level where they were having no sort of charitable benefit for making that gift, as you all know. So my only point here is you hear a lot of noise around tax policy and what whip that might create through the charitable system. At least a lot of the evidence would suggest it's got a lot less whip than people think, number one. And it's also, I think, an important reminder about how crazy generous we are as a people. Like, weird freak generous. You already know we are more generous than any other country in the world, but then you look at UK and Canada, we're like way ahead of them as well, at least on a per capita basis. So my only point here is, again, taxes have a lot less impact than people think, so as a suggestion. Any questions on that or thoughts? Well, good, okay. So I'm not going to talk much about the non-cash side of this because obviously that's going to go the whole next thing, and there's some redundancy here, so I'm going to jump through that. The only sort of theme here is cash bad, everything else good. That's tax planning right there for charitable planning. What is everything else? Long-term capital gain assets that have appreciated the most, you want to give that. And in particular now, for people who can't itemize, which are expecting about 90% of people-ish are not going to be itemizing under the new Tax Act, that there can still be a great benefit in them giving publicly traded securities, of course, that have appreciated in value, obviously because they're not having to recognize any of that capital gains tax. So they still get a tax benefit by instead making gifts of appreciated stock or other assets, as you all know. One thing that I'm surprised a lot of advisors don't advise more, frankly, is even for a person who might wish to give $5,000 or $10,000 of appreciated stock, for them to then be able to simply buy that stock back. You all know how that works, not that complicated. They give $10,000 away, they can get a $10,000 deduction if they itemize, but even if they don't, they're not having to pay the capital gains taxes I just mentioned, and then to be able to use the $10,000 in cash perhaps that they had to simply buy back that same stock if they wish to hold the same position. What most people think is they have to wait 30 days to do that, and that is actually not the case. They could do it immediately. So the 30-day rule is under the basically wash sale rule. In this case, they could do it instantly. So I really don't see as much of that as I would have expected for those people that say, but I love Apple stock, but I love Amazon stock. It's like, you can love it all you want. Give that away and then just take cash to just repurchase the same position. So you end up in the same portfolio place, but obviously now with a stepped up basis in that stock. Does that make sense? So very simple. You guys know all about this. I just don't see it sort of happening enough, I think, in this space, and perhaps will happen more. So next sort of opportunity, and again, we're going to spend a lot more time on the non-cash assets in the next section, are estate planning, life insurance, and IRA gifts. So you know all about this. What I'm finding, or hearing at least, and please correct me, is that a number of people with the estate law, tax law changes that had so many of their plans based on formulas, that they're actually coming back in and having those revisions done. And it wasn't immediate in January, but it's sort of working its way through the system now. So the only point there is there's a lot of new opportunities for conversation about having the revised plan discussion and what, if any, might include some charitable provisions as well. So just the activity of revising those estate plans is creating other sort of conversations and other potential activity. Life insurance. How much life insurance has been sold over the last 10, 20, 30 years in irrevocable life insurance trusts specifically designed to be able to pay for estate tax? A lot. Now, most of that, not all perhaps, but most of that, now the original purpose of the purchase itself was to be able to have estate tax liquidity, and now we're seeing more and more of that being repurposed for other kind of liquidity. Not many of these are being sold, either donated the policy itself to charity, or I've got this little piece here with the IRA gift where they're having their obviously IRD assets, retirement plan assets, which are bad, as you well know, as it relates to estate, to be able to have those directed for charity for all the good reasons that you know, and now they're in essence repurposing the ILET insurance to be a replacement sort of asset for other assets that they're giving away, primarily retirement plan assets. Does that make sense? So they've got their $100,000 IRA, and they're saying, well, now I don't have the estate tax. I'll give the IRA to charity to the extent there's anything left and I don't need it. But now what do I do with this life insurance? Kids might be saying, I kind of wanted that IRA. Yeah, I'll take 30 or 40 or 50 cents on the dollar, but that's something. And you'd say, even better, we'll have the life insurance sort of directed to you, no income or estate tax, as you know, and that way it's creating, in essence, a wealth replacement, but even though it wasn't designed to do that. So there's a lot more repurposing of the life insurance that already exists, and there is a lot of death benefit that's been purchased for estate liquidity. So seeing more activity in that space too. You already know this. I hate even bringing it up, but I still see this happening. You've got the client's got $250,000 in IRA, $250,000 in cash. We are still seeing where testamentary disposition is using the cash to make the charitable gift versus the IRA. So as you're doing, what I'm really encouraging you to think about is if people are coming back in for any kind of financial plan or estate plan revision, to really triple check that side of it is to say, make sure you're not giving the IRD type assets to heirs and non-IRD stuff to charity. Obviously, that should be reversed, so to be able to be much more tax efficient. We still see this more than you would think, frankly. Any questions about any of that stuff generally? A lot more attention now is on the qualified charitable distributions. A lot of attention, and really cool things are being done with that. So just to, again, be very, very clear, if they're 70 and a half, not the year following they turn 70 and a half, as soon as they turn 70 and a half, they are then eligible to make a qualified charitable distribution. And my bad joke is there's sort of 3 times in life that you want to have a fake ID. So maybe you're 19, so you can go the rest of that way. The second thing is maybe you've done some kind of crime and you're trying to get out of the country, so you need like a fake passport. That's like number 2. And number 3, 70 and a half. So you want to get a fake ID making you 70 and a half so that you can take full advantage of the qualified charitable distributions. That's limited to $100,000 per year. That does satisfy the required minimum distributions, which is a big, big deal, as you know. But what we're finding, and I think it's very interesting to see how these are being used, is more and more people are thinking, planners are thinking about using them almost like a donor-advised fund. So now, if you're thinking about years, we're going to talk about bunching in a second, but if you're not getting the benefit from an itemized deduction anyway, in those years, if you're over 70 and a half, you can just simply direct those qualifying charitable distributions right out of your IRA, must be an IRA, to the 2, 3, 5, 6 different charities that you'd like to make gifts to anyway. So you're removing that obviously from the IRA. All the IRD stuff obviously is flowing through. There's no deduction, as you know, but there's no recognition of income, which is the same as if you got a 100% recognition and a 100% wash as a deduction. So we're seeing more and more in those cases, and then when they actually have a year that they'd like to make a large charitable gift, then they're not using the IRA to do that. They're doing the large gift that they are able then to take advantage of the itemized deductions through bunching, and they sort of turn off the spigot then for the IRA again. Does that make sense? So that was not used in that way as much, certainly a year or 2 years ago. It still cannot be used for private foundations or donor-advised funds or supporting organizations. There are some clever types of vehicles that some community foundations have created, in essence like a defective donor-advised fund, which can be done. So spin-down designated funds is basically what they are, to say now that we have a clear definition of what donor-advised funds are, then we can make them not a donor-advised fund from a tax perspective to be able to take in qualified charitable distribution. Yeah, question?
That's exactly what I was
There you go. Perfect. Have you guys done that before by chance? So that spin-down designated fund or sort of the defective donor-advised fund?
We get a lot of calls of people asking to do a qualified charitable rollover from their IRA into their donor-advised fund, and we have to say no to that, but we have done field of interest funds. And designated funds.
Okay, well, perfect. Well, there's sort of a couple things too, and this is so important. You've got donor advised funds that we've talked about, but your community foundation, as you know, has a lot more than just donor advised funds. So just as you said, it can be field of interest funds, designated funds, agency endowment funds, scholarship funds, unrestricted funds. All these different funds that are endowment funds would qualify for those kind of gifts, number one. Number two, you can do just a designated fund, but technically, in different foundations, different policies, so I want to be a little bit careful here, but one of the key definitions of a donor advised fund is the donor, or the advisor more specifically, has the right to advise post-contribution. So what you can basically do is you create a designated fund to say, I'll give you $100,000, and I will relinquish my right to advise any of this after I make the donation, but I would like to make a $10,000 per year gift to my church over the next 10 years. Does that make sense? So it's a spin down fund, but it's technically not a donor advised fund, which would then still qualify because it's clearly not an advised fund because they don't retain the right to advise post contribution. So a couple of clever things there. Yes?
Do you hear any chatter about a legislative change? This is pretty dumb. I can make.
God, it's so dumb. Go ahead. Yeah.
30 charities from my IRA. So why could I do it with the donor advised fund? It's just a stupid. Stupid limitation. But is there any chatter in the charitable community about trying to change that?
I have not heard, and I will tell you, I'm going to be a little careful here. We can talk about donor advised funds, which we are a little bit more too. Generally speaking, and I say all this with love, you'll never see me again. Most of the charitable community, if they were voting without a lot of sunlight around it, don't like donor advised funds anyway. So there's less of a groundswell to sort of quote unquote fix that issue other than from donor advised fund providers, all things being equal. There is a real effort to try to allow qualified charitable distributions to go to life income gifts. So primarily gift annuities and or charitable remainder trusts. So there's a much bigger push there than allowing QCDs to go to donor advised funds, all things being equal. If anything, many in the charitable community, you know, there are other donor advised fund noise that you're well aware, we can talk about that, that they would not want to liberalize that vehicle anymore, generally speaking. Yeah, there's definitely a lobbying group for community foundations and others, and I know him quite well. Yes. Yes. With a different lobbying group, but yes. But having said that, I'm not sure. Donor advised funds are just growing so fast, and it's got people very nervous, and they sort of don't fully understand why they're growing so fast. Many of you all know, but in the charitable communities, they just think it's this giant vacuum sucking machine that if they did not exist, this is their position, that all that money would be coming to them immediately. So we need to get rid of that middleman, just in that, and anything that helps accentuate more gifts going into that bucket is not something that generally the charitable community wants to support. These are sweeping generalizations, but that's about right. Hence the 5% payout requirement, hence all of these other sort of legislative things to try to push or pull money out of donor advised funds. Yeah, but smoking growth in that space, fastest growing vehicle by far of anything, as you all know. And again, we can talk a little bit more about that, but it's a great question. For donor advised funds, they would all be lumped together.
Among us,
yes.
it's going to be a Vanguard, places like that. The growth in the funds.
It'd be about the same, believe it or not. Yeah. If you peel out, yes, I understand your question. So if you take, Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, those are the big three. If you look at their rough growth rate, and if you were actually just able to suss out or partition out just donor advised funds for the almost 900 community foundations that exist, and Jewish federations obviously too, other donor advised fund providers, I think you'll find that the growth rate is very, very close on a percentage basis. I'd be blown away. You hear more about Schwab, Vanguard, and Fidelity because they're all sort of combined into those versus 900 community foundations. How many Jewish federations are there now? I mean, roughly about 50 to 75-ish of sort of size. A little bit more? Okay, 100, 150 or so. So it's just sort of bifurcating all those into so many little parts. They're not easy, as easy to see, but I would bet it's about the same growth. Yeah, Patty?
So, my understanding of the IRA is it has to come from the administrator.
Yeah.
Straight to the donor doesn't touch it. So I had a donor call me yesterday and wanted to tell me that she had an IRA checkbook from her broker, from the brokerage house, say, and that she would be writing checks on it. And then I know about that, because she didn't want to do it until she checked with us. So I had to say no, because I don't. No.
Yeah.
It's in the brokerage manual.
Yes.
It's published, and then it says that some banks don't like to take it. But I gotta ask the question because it's not something that
Yes. I am not an expert on the administration side of that. I've heard about that a lot, and I don't think there's any issue because still it's technically going directly from the brokerage house, and then when they give you the check, then it's coming from them to you.
the donor has signed it. They
Yes.
have it in their hand.
Yes.
The donor would be signing a letter of instruction telling the brokerage house to write the check, so it's just.
Yes.
A check is nothing other than an instrument which says, pay this money.
Correct.
To Brady Miller.
Correct. There'd be a bigger issue if she received the check, deposited the check, and then turned around. So as long as it's almost like an IRA trustee to trustee sort of transfer, this is the trustee or administrator transfer directly to the charity using the check as the sort of medium to be able to affect that transfer. Yeah. That's right. Or somebody else in here may. That's right. You got to do it fast.
I told her already.
Sure. Questions about that sort of side or IRA stuff at all? So we're seeing a lot more attention and activity here. And obviously we were in a place for so long where are they going to, up it again and put it part of the extenders and all of these kind of things. I think it finally now, through at least planning, are people are saying it's here to stay, and it might be modified, but at least it's here to stay and made permanent. So I think that maybe more of your clients are going to be hearing, certainly from their charities, a lot more this year. They probably already have. Wait until year end. So this is going to be a heavy push of qualified charitable distribution sort of requests. Yeah.
I was actually surprised that I haven't seen a lot of notes from charities pushing their qualified charity distribution because it's a no-brainer.
It is.
So you got $24,000 standing deduction. Almost no one is itemizing unless you're
Yes.
wealthy. Yet if you're 70 and a half, you've got a donor advised fund right there.
You do.
And it's free money. It's essentially a free deduction.
It is. It's a dunk. It is a planning dunk. And the key is they as the donor have to understand, I mean, to some extent, sort of Patty's question, how do we maneuver through the system to make sure we have it? Because you read some of these, like, if you do this bad, you're going to get shocked and this thing's bad. And so they're a little freaked out by that. So, but hopefully as advisors, you can be their Sherpas to sort of help them through that. But I think that there's going to be a heavy push coming probably in another 2 weeks to a month. I know a lot of the brochure companies and the online plain giving companies are all ready to just blast this out everywhere. So I hope that will create more conversation with you and your clients, certainly as it relates to that. So we'll see. Any other questions on that? All good. So again, we're going to see more. The final one is, the final slide here is around the donor advised fund donation. It's almost like donor advised fund sponsors wrote the tax law. It really is. I mean, it's just as like, oh my God, this is just fantastic. So what does it mean to bunch? You know what it means. If you're not going to be able to at least exceed, significantly so probably, the standard deduction in 1 year, then you actually don't want to make, ideally, any charitable contributions in that year. And then you might wait a year or 2 or 3, and then you make a really big one, bunching them all in that particular year to dramatically exceed the standard deduction. There is no vehicle on this earth any better than a donor advised fund to do that. So if you're planning something or selling something, you dunk that thing in there, take the full deduction in the year of the gift, no capital gains tax at the time of sale, as you know, and now you're getting that full deduction in that year, and then you can use your donor advised fund, of course, to make all the charitable gifts that you were making anyway out of that bucket versus out of your left pocket, if that makes sense. To the extent you don't have enough in your donor advised fund and you're over 70.5, now you're right back to the IRA qualified charitable distributions. There's going to be a lot more coordination, in my view, between the QCD, especially for those over 70.5, of course, and the donor advised fund. So that's going to be sort of the interplay between those two to be able to optimize your tax planning, all things being equal. I've already talked about the itemized deduction phase out, repeal, which is it's a much bigger deal than people are talking about. That is a big, big deal at the higher levels. A lot of the gifts we work on are 2.5 to 3 million. It would be about the average, and that would come up every single time prior to the new tax law. So big deal there. Deferred life income optimization. Here's a thing that we've done now three times so far this year. Now when you have the bunching, the issue there is, are you going to bunch so much in a particular year selling a piece of real estate or publicly traded stock or a private company that you're actually going to exceed your ability to be able to use all of your charitable income tax deduction over that 6-year period. So as you all know, it's the year of the gift plus 5 additional carry forward years at 30% of the adjusted gross income for appreciated property, now 60%, that changed, 60% for cash. The deferred life income optimization is a very clever maneuver where if somebody were to say, we just did one, it was about a $6 million gift, and they said, we're never going to be able to use all of this deduction. And we find that a lot when people are selling their private businesses because then their actual income and AGI goes way down after that. And so we said, well, let's work with your advisors. And they ended up doing a $3.5 million outright gift to a donor advised fund. And then they did about a $2.5 million deferred charitable gift annuity. I want to sort of talk through this a little bit. A deferred charitable gift annuity with $2.5 million. They have zero interest in ever getting life income out of that annuity. They don't ever want to get life income. So this one was 61, 62 years old. He said, I'm going to defer it till I'm 80. So he would get a present value deduction, of course, for that amount, which was then calibrated to the donor advised fund so they would still be able to use it easily over the 6-year period. If they gave the whole thing away, they would have lost any unused carry forward at the end of 6 years. At the end of 6 years now, what do they have? They still have a $2.5 million deferred gift annuity. Is everybody with me so far? So now, in year 7, they might say, I don't need a deduction this year at all. Okay. Year 8, I don't need a deduction. Year 9, I need a big deduction. I need about a $400,000 deduction this year. That would be optimal for me. Okay. These are rough math, but you get it. They simply terminate their life income interest of maybe 30% of that gift annuity. They technically assigning the interest back to the charity who issued it. So they get an additional deduction for the present value of what they just transferred back. Does that make sense? I almost call it a charitable suspension account. They could have a spigot at any point in the future to dial it in an optimal way for the year that they need the deduction and the size of the deduction. So they just push out the deferral so long that they could just pick any year that they want to revoke whatever proportional amount of life income interest that they need for that particular year. And then that just accelerates that, and that just drops right into their donor advised fund too. Does that make sense? It's kind of a cool deal. Doesn't come up a lot. But for those very charitably inclined people to say, I wish I could give more, I'd like to give more, but I know that I'll never be able to use the charitable deduction in the 6-year period, you can use a deferred charitable gift annuity. You could use a CRT for that matter, a charitable remainder trust, that you could then revoke that partial interest in some future year on whatever size that you would want. So kind of a cool thing that's coming up more. And I know too that when you look at the average donor advised fund from Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, and the 23 others or so that have them, they're usually about half the average that they are at community foundations. So community foundations tend to have a relatively smaller number individually because there's so many other ones, but they tend to be larger, so all things being equal. This is important from a policy standpoint. I'm going to tip over a table because I get so mad about this. 85 billion in total assets. They're growing at about a 12 to 15% a year clip. So it is just a juggernaut growth in this space. 23 million in new contributions, 15 billion in new contributions, 15 billion in grants. So if you take 85 billion in assets and 15 billion in grants, that's 20%-ish payouts. So if you read these articles, New York Times, all these other ones, you get as mad as I do about this obsession. It is just makes no sense to me about requiring a 5% payout. It's like they're paying out 20%. Why are we even talking about this stuff? Because they're so focused on the 1 or 2 or the minority that aren't paying out anything in a particular year, and they might build it up for 2 or 3 years to do a real big gift then. But while they're doing that, there's another one blowing out 80% of the thing. They always want to just ignore that part. So when you look at national donor-advised funds, Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, others, they tend to be about 22 to 25% payout each year. And most community foundations for donor-advised funds tend to be about 18 to 20% each year. Is that anywhere close to 5%? No. And what they don't understand as policymakers, I get so mad about this, is that there's this whole concept of behavioral finance, which many of you are very well aware. And there's this notion called anchoring. And anchoring is if you tell somebody they have to do something, then that's what they're going to do. You can only get, you must give out 5% every year. What are they going to give out? 5%. They're giving out 20%. But the whole reason you're trying to make a policy to give out 5% is because you want them to give out more, when in fact they're going to give out less if you do that. How do we know that? Because private foundations can give away as much as they want every year. But they have to give out 5%, don't they? No. The CPAs in this room can tell me, you don't have to say amen because you live here, but you don't ever give out 5%. You give out 4.76234221% because you've done your expenses through administration to be able to back that out, to credit that against your payout. So you don't even have to, look, isn't this great? We don't even have to give out 5% a year. I'm being bad, but you get the point. It just makes no sense. No sense. Oh, this whole New York Times piece, what was that, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago? I'm reading this going, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You're upset about vehicles that are giving out 20% a year, but they never mention private foundations. They never mention all these other things that are giving out a whole lot less than 20% because they're worried about people sandbagging, the question is, taking deductions now for the benefit to occur later. Well, that's every endowment in the entire country, is it not? It's every private foundation in the entire country, is it not? I mean, it's just very, very peculiar to me. So anyway, average size now just under $300,000. Quick important point here that now I believe there's now public record that there are at least $7 billion individual donor advised funds. So when I came up in this business, I met Patty in 1998. I was 5 and a half. I had my pacifier and my Johnny jump up. Anyway, I was taught that if it's, less than $3 million you do donor advised funds, more than $3 million, $5 million, $10 million, there are a lot of people out there to say, I will put $1 billion in. I think Tulsa's got one that's $4 billion from one person that just said, I want a public charity platform, and then we don't have to do any of the administration, Chapter 42 rules, all this other kind of stuff. Not saying donor advised funds are better than private foundations, but they're a lot more flexible, a lot easier, a lot more efficient, generally speaking, unless you want to hire somebody. I'm going to be bad that you can't get a job anywhere else, and you want to hire a family member, kind of maneuver. And you want legal control. There are a number of good things that you can certainly do with a private foundation. But my point in all of this is there are a lot of these that are coming in that are gigantic, that 10, 15 years ago, if I would have said there's $1 billion donor advised fund, I think most advisors would say, that makes no sense at all. They should be doing a private foundation or something else. So, does that make sense overall? All good? Okay. That's my donor advised fund stuff. I think I may need your help flipping it over. Yeah, the entire Kansas City Royals baseball team was donated to the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. Yeah, my joke there was it wasn't like just the autograph stand and the concession. No, whole team. And I think this is important too as it relates to donor advised funds. I didn't know Mr. Kaufman, who owned the team, so he passed away in the mid-90s, but I bet I know what he was thinking. He's probably thinking, no idiot, not to be bad, no idiot's going to buy the Kansas City Royals baseball team and keep it in Kansas City. That is not the profit optimization locale. But I raised my family here. I built my business here. This is a jewel of the community, part of our city's culture, and it's important to me that it stays here. So he basically he did, through his estate, left the entire Kansas City Royals baseball team to a donor-advised fund at the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation, put an advisory board around or on the fund to then be able to receive bids for the team that had a very strong bias toward a local group wanting to keep it local. Obviously, full charitable estate tax deduction, no capital gains tax at the time of sale. Then when they sold in the late 90s, and they're still there, obviously, then they have now a huge bucket of charitable giving resources that then now the family is able to give out. So just donor advised funds are just really cool, and especially in that kind of context or that kind of space, to be sure. Okay, so next one we'll talk about creative charitable planning with non-cash assets. So this one I get very excited about. So we'll talk about the market overview briefly, some non-cash asset types. So we already talked about the baseball team. What I call the 5-minute non-cash tax seminar, legislative update, reasons why at least initially these are declined. About 80% of the time they are declined initially by charities, and then a couple case studies too. So again, any questions you have, this is where I get all excited around non-cash stuff. So this is where I spend most of my time. The first thing that is critically important, and you all know this intuitively, and certainly through your practice as well, but when you look at affluent investors' assets, when you look at the overall balance sheet, cash is always the smallest piece of their overall balance sheet. When the Spectrum Group did a high net worth study back in 2007, before the 2008 fund, it was actually 3 to 4% for affluent investors, $1 million of investable assets or above. Only 3 to 4% of their overall assets were in cash. Then they learned about the term liquidity, just like we all did, right? I had a very different definition of liquidity in 2007 than I did in 2008 and 9. It's like, whoa. Now it's almost doubled, in fact, did double to 6 to 8%. My point is, who cares? It's still the smallest piece of the overall balance sheet. If you don't know anything else when you leave here today, as I said, cash bad. Why? The smallest piece of their overall assets, the least tax-effective way almost always to make the gift, and it hurts their lifestyle the most when they make the gift. So what is the percentage of total giving in terms of assets in this country that come in the form of cash? 92%. Oh. 92% of all the gifts in this whole country come in the form of cash, which is almost always the worst possible way to make the gift. My head's going to explode. Now, a ton of those are small gifts. I get it, but a ton of those aren't. So cash, most always the worst way to make a gift. Then you look at the aggregate stock market value. This keeps moving. I think we hit an S&P record today. I would think we were at least intraday. So you're welcome. So every time I come and speak to you guys, we're hitting an S&P record. So at least today. You got to take the wins where you can. So it's about $26 trillion. What does that mean? That means all of the stock in the entire stock market, if you mush it, is about $26 trillion. What number is that kind of close to? National debt's about $20 trillion. Can you even get your brains wrapped around that? That means we would have to nationalize every single publicly traded company in the entire country, no capital gains tax, because that'll screw the math up, and we would have $5 trillion or so extra after doing that, after selling off all the companies. I mean, it's just insane, but I digress. Non-cash market, about 50 to 60 trillion. What is non-cash? You already know it's not cash, you knew that, but it's not anything that's liquid. So real estate, closely held businesses, and all kinds of other illiquid assets that people own are well over double that of the entire stock market. So that's where we're going to sort of hone in on. And in many cases, that can be the most conducive way to make gifts too. $390 billion in total donations last year. We estimate about 6 to 8% of these would be in illiquid form. This is not thrift store stuff. These would be $5,000 or more where there'd be a qualified appraiser completing a qualified appraisal. So on one hand, you might say 6 to 8%, that's not very much. On a percentage basis, not really, But 8% roughly on 400 billion, that's $32 billion in 1 year coming in the form of these illiquid kind of gifts. This is hyper accelerating over the last 5 to 6 years in particular. And at least so far this year, I have never seen activity in my 25 years of doing this of non-cash asset transactions like this year so far. So I cannot figure out what it is. I keep thinking maybe people did not do the merger and acquisition late last year because of the tax law ambiguity, and maybe they spilled it into this year, and once you kind of get it cranked up, that's February, and then in the summer all these things are closing. We've done more through our charity this summer than we had done in the first 7 years of operation. I mean, it's just massive numbers of illiquid asset transactions. So we'll see what that means for year end. And what are some of these too? When Mark Zuckerberg, when Social Network movie came out, he did not look so good with that movie. How many people saw that movie? So, Social Network. Okay, and then where do you go in this country? It's a very tangible place if you don't look very good and you're trying to redeem your reputation. So, and you'll all agree with me when I say it. Does anybody know? Oprah's couch is where you go. So where is Oprah? Where is her couch? I must get onto her couch. And he did, about a week after it came out, and then made an announcement of a $100 million gift to the New Jersey public school system, right? So almost everybody remembers that. And when I do big rooms, more people remember that than the movie. And I'm like, that was the point. So he gave $100 million to the New Jersey public school system, right? No, he gave pre-IPO closely held C Corporation Facebook stock, put that in essence into a donor advised fund. It was a supporting org. Full fair market value at the time of the gift. No capital gains tax when that sold in that IPO, which did not go very well, as you might recall. All out of the state for estate tax purposes. And then he was able to make grants over to the New Jersey public school system as they met certain benchmarks. That's how that gift worked behind the scenes. Does that make sense? That gift had gone horribly, by the way. You can Google that and see all kinds of interesting reading. But that actually was the funding mechanism for that gift. So when I'm on a plane and I want to talk to somebody, which I never do, I would say, they say, what do you do for a living? I would say, well, I help rich people give weird things to charity. And no matter what, they are compelled to say, well, what's the weirdest thing? And now I'm talking for 30 minutes, so I don't do that. If you don't want to talk to somebody on the plane, what can you say? It's very simple. I'm a life insurance agent. That will shut them down. You can go from New Orleans to Shanghai, library, the whole way. It's fantastic. It's a 40-hour class, should be a whole lot harder because in the 41st hour, you can do significant financial damage to people, by the way, when you're unleashed in the public. But it's almost worth the 40-hour class and the overly easy test, by the way, because then you've got human repellent for the rest of your life. It is fantastic. Airplanes, social function, family meetings, insurance agent. Good. I didn't want to talk to you anyway, so it works out great. So, or I'm cheap. I already told you I was cheap. You could buy the Bose headsets, Bose headphones. So anybody know Dr. Bose evidently likes MIT. So he went to MIT, taught at MIT, earned his PhD at MIT. So he liked them so much, I think it was 2012, he gave them 50.1% of the Bose Corporation. You're like, oh, that's kind of a cool gift. Yeah, it's kind of neat. Thought to be $1.4 to $1.5 billion. One shot. Closely held C Corp. Full fair market value deduction out of the state for estate tax purposes. No capital gains tax when and if they sell that. So you're seeing the theme there. So a lot more of these are actually happening than you may see, but are happening sort of behind the scenes in terms of the assets that are using to fund many of these very, very large gifts. I mentioned the Tulsa Community Foundation, which is now, I think they're still the largest community foundation in the country, or maybe second largest. But that was, I think it was 3.8 billion was one shot, I think it was a cable company. So a lot of these are very large gifts that occur. Okay, so this is important just to see a trend. So there are 3 charities, like one more than 2, 3 charities that focus in this space. I set one up in 2003. We have 2 evil competitors, although we talk all the time, like each other. So if you look at the 3 of our charities, only illiquid gifts, in 2010, you'll see we raised $108 million combined, aggregated with the 3 in 2010. Then in 2012, it was $429 million. 2014, $828 million. 2016, just over $1 billion. 2017, preliminary numbers because they're waiting to get their 990s finished, is about $1.23 billion. To 3 charities, only illiquid assets. Not cash thrown in there, not publicly traded stock thrown in there, only illiquid. Then you look at the average value. It's gone from 700,000. Now it dropped actually a little bit in 2016 down to 2.1 million. So they tend to be a relatively small number of larger value transactions prior to merger acquisition, prior to selling real estate, things like that. So all that sort of makes sense. So a lot of activity. A lot of community foundations do this. Your community foundation can do this. But these are just 3 charities, as I said, that specialize just in illiquid asset transactions. Okay. So what kinds are we talking about? We've already hit this a good bit. The first thing that's important to note is real estate, before the real estate meltdown, was about 60% of everything that we worked on. During the meltdown, 60% of what we worked on. And today, 60% of what we work on. That can't be. Don't you know about Florida? I live in Florida. I get it. But the media would lead you to believe that everybody bought their house in Florida in 2006. Some people bought a triplex in Florida in 1991. And CPAs, what do you do to investment or commercial property every single year? You depreciate it. What does it mean to depreciate it? You're lowering your adjusted cost or tax basis until what? Until it's zero. Whoa, wait a minute. You mean if I sold that quadruplex or that triplex and I have zero cost basis, that I would have 100% long-term capital gain? Everybody in this room better right now be thinking, that could be a good charitable gift. Yes, it could be. By design, it's lowering the cost basis every single year. Another critical point, this is a major nugget, about 3/4 of all the gifts that we work on are not the entire interest. 3/4 are fractional undivided interests. What does that mean? Did Mark Zuckerberg give all of Facebook away? No. Did Dr. Bose give all of Bose? No. So it's the triplex that they might say, I love you, charity, 40% undivided interest worth. I'm keeping 60%. So now when we go to sale, I'm getting my deduction on the 40, no capital gains tax on the 40, and I'm using that deduction and that savings to help wash out some of the gain that I held back on the 60% that I have. Does that make sense? So a lot of advisors still think they have to be super charitable and give the whole thing away. No, no, no. They just sort of dial up whatever ownership percentage that would make sense for them as part of their planning. Okay, so lots of real estate. One thing I did not include, that's the partial versus entire interest. One thing I did not include on here is foreign versus domestic. We're seeing a lot more foreign activity. So we just did, 6 weeks ago, a 190-acre ranch in Uganda. Can't make that up. So if anybody's looking for a Ugandan ranch, we can knock it out before I drive over to Lake Charles too, so we don't have a buyer yet for it. We've done a Paris condo. We've done 2 now, properties in China, 1 in Canada, Mexico, a lot in Central America, very large swaths in Central America. So not only just real estate domestically, but sort of in all forms geographically too. Privately held interest would be about the other 30% of what we deal with. So that'd be obviously closely held C corporation, S corps, LLCs, and LP interest. Obviously anything that's not publicly traded. Now I cheat a little bit here where if it's an LLC as an example that holds real estate, I'm saying that's real estate. So obviously the underlying asset is in essence, not in essence, it is real estate. So, but a lot of privately held interests, and that has been booming this summer. So all the merger and acquisition activity is accelerating this market in a big way, where the person is saying, I want to be able to make a gift prior to, which we'll talk about, there being a legally binding contract to sell. And I'll make that gift then in my privately held business, just like Mark Zuckerberg did. Whatever the qualified appraiser comes back with the qualified appraisal as to value, that becomes my deduction, no capital gains tax on that portion. So it can work really, really well. Any questions on those 2 big ones? So again, about 90%-ish would be real estate or closely held business interests. What everybody wants to talk about is all kind of other weird stuff that's out there. That's like the other 10%, so that's not the meat of it, but there are lots of weird things. And you can see here, tangible personal property, I'm not going to go into it too much. Basically, that is anything that you can touch it and throw it at somebody. So antiques and coins, nothing more pain in the butt than coins. Jewelry, anything like that would be tangible personal property. The quick rules there are that if you make a gift of tangible personal property, the textbook example, painting to a museum that they hang, you can get a fair market value because it's related to their mission, so it's a use-related deduction. If you gave the same painting to the museum and they said, this is great, we've got an auction in 2 weeks, what is the deduction? It's the lesser of fair market value or cost basis, likely cost basis, because it's not their exempt mission to run auctions. That's not what their exempt status was based on. So you got to be a little bit careful about related use deductions to make sure that they actually are going to use it for the purposes for their exempt status. Anybody know, we've done 2 gifts of wine. Anybody know how you can get a full fair market value deduction for a gift of wine? So what charity would sort of have a related use for that wine as part of their purpose? Communion, baby. Yes. So we did a lot of 74 Lafite. I'm not a wine drinker, but it was pricey. And so the donor called, and we worked out with the church. And then this was my consulting advice, which they didn't like, by the way. I said, look, if you're ever going to do your membership drive, this is the week. So you take out like the Welch's grape juice, you put in the 74 Lafite, people are doing seconds on communion going, this is the greatest place ever, you know. And then you're like, oh, we ran out, but you've signed them all up. So bait and switch maybe, but I would do it. So that's just me. Another cool one we did with wine separate from this where he did not get a related use deduction. So we do a lot of these transactions where they don't want related use. They just want to have the full proceeds end up in their donor advised fund. So they'll take a cost basis deduction, but their bigger issue is, yeah, even if I get a full fair market value on the painting at the museum, I don't have anything in my donor advised fund. So maybe I'll take a 10% deduction on that, but if I have $500,000 that ends up in my donor advised fund, when it sells, I like that. And many of you may know collectibles tax never changed, so that's still 28% long-term gains rate for any collectible. But we did one case, it was written up in Forbes, I wouldn't talk about it, but REM band. So the band manager bought tons and tons of red wine from Christie's and Sotheby's. And so this was in 2006. And his wife said, this is non-tax planning, right? I want the cellar back. We have all this wine in the cellar. How many parties are you going to have? Can't make this up either. He said, when I drink red wine, I get a massive headache. So he goes, I don't even drink the red wine anymore. Massive appreciation. So we ended up going to Athens, Georgia, taking all of this wine, literally from Athens to the Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, then went to Hong Kong, sold in the Chinese wine auction in Hong Kong. No capital gains tax for him. Took about a 15% deduction. But when it was all the dust cleared, he had about $280,000 in his donor advised fund that now he could use that as the cash to make all the charitable gifts that he wished, rather than giving other assets out of his left pocket. And his wife got the cellar back. So interesting ways to be able to do this where even a fair market value may not necessarily be the best in that situation. So lots of those kind of gifts. And weird stuff, I've got all kinds of weird stories, but we did, so we didn't do the transaction with the Royals, but we did a transaction with the Minnesota Vikings. So when the Minnesota Vikings sold in 2006, we worked with one of the minority owners, same thing. So 4% interest in the Minnesota Vikings Football Club LLC, purchased it in the early 70s. I saw what he purchased it for. My parents were hippies, and in our Volkswagen camper with a pop-up top, I will guarantee you within like the cushions, they would have about the amount of money that this guy purchased the Vikings for. It was like 14 wooden nickels and a box top or something. It was just crazy. Massive appreciation. And so he was able to make that gift, full deduction, fair market value deduction, no capital gains tax. You know the rest of that story too. Does all that make sense? I do have to tell you, this is going to be a weird confession. The worst part about my job, like off the chart bad, is to listen to the annoying success stories from all of these donors every single day. The worst was last year with cryptocurrency. Oh my God. My grandson got me 18 Bitcoin as a joke, for my, 70th birthday in 2014, and now it's worth $80 million. Like, oh my God. And they complain. That's what drives me crazy. Well, I don't want to sell this. My uncle bought half of Arizona for, $37. But now if I sell it, I'm going to get, this is the exact quote they'll use, I'm going to get killed with capital gains taxes. I'm like, shut up. You let me I will take that burden off of you. Let me get killed with millions and millions of dollars of capital gains taxes. I'm willing to do that just for you. It's like, ugh. But because all I'm dealing with are people that have these massive appreciation assets, I feel like I'm like the worst investor ever, because it's every day they're calling me with, oh, I got this massive gain, I've got this. I'm like, I don't have any massive gain in anything. But I digress. Shot everything. Stuffed them all. Brought them back to Hartford, Connecticut, built a 5,200 square foot addition on his house, was not married, not sure why. Fully standing African elephant, 2 black rhinos, 85 friends. And so Hartford Foundation was going, we cannot take this. We will have PETA on our lawn with like fire torches. This is above the fold PR we're not looking to get, but the 706 estate value is about $550,000. We'd like the $550,000. How do we sort of maneuver this? So that's the one dead animal story. The funny thing about that was I did get the 706 qualified appraisal, and it was a PDF, so it came through as a PDF. And so the first one was the African elephant, so that had the most value by far. Like, okay, my wife's like standing over my shoulder. And then the next one was the better quality black rhino. Like, they're both dead, but better quality one. And so that had a value. And then the third one was the lesser quality black rhino. And by then I've deduced, I'm like, oh, it's descending order of value. So the way my brain works, because of the THC perhaps, was that I'm gonna grab the slider and I have to know what's 88. That's all, what's 88? So I grab the thing, I was like, bing, go all the way down to 88. And it's sort of this sort of murky picture, and it was a 3-legged Arctic fox. And I'm looking at the thing, and I'm looking like, it's got 3 legs. And then so I start to try to make, logical, well, maybe the trap got the legs, but no, trap didn't get it. I'm like, maybe it's like in the South, you guys have them too, these 2-headed turtles, it's like a genetic anomaly thing. It's like just born with 3 legs. No. And then I saw appraiser's notes. You sort of flipped the page, and it said appraiser's notes, very old, leg fell off. I was like, oh my God. No value, 0 value. And my wife says, she goes, I'm telling you now, if all these things go to auction, that one's going too. That's not coming back to the Clontz household that we take like the 3-legged fox that we're leaning against the hearth, because it didn't have a leg. And I said, honey, that is like the number 109th reason for duct tape. Duct tape is gray. Elephants are gray. I said, I'm going to duct tape this in the armpit of the elephant. We actually had to get a qualified appraiser to appraise per cubic yard of dirt for 28 truckloads of dirt to fill in the National Mall in D.C. I mean, this is my world. You just cannot make this up. Anyway, other kind of weird stuff. Any questions on that? Any good stuff? Okay. Yeah.
Didn't the IRS change its position, and you can now make a gift to a title holding entity that's owned by...
Yes, you can.
Before, you had to make a gift to the entity.
Yes, it did.
That's been changed about, what, 3 or 4 years?
It's a little bit more than that, but yes, I will decipher this and correct me if I'm misinterpreting. So forever, there was an annoying IRS non-ruling, basically. They just refused to rule, which was idiotic, frankly, that they basically said you had to give any gift directly to the charity. The charity had to take direct ownership. And everybody was like, look, if you use an LLC, which is really what you're referring to, is a disregarded entity, that's the same as giving to the parent, but that would provide some management and certainly some risk containment within the LLC. So there were some advisors that would say that should work. There's nothing that says that it shouldn't work, but a number of requests to the IRS was saying, can you just say it work? They wouldn't do it. Like for a decade, probably 12 years, long time. So it just annoyed everybody. So I want to say it was maybe 2008-ish. It might have been 2008, 2009-ish, maybe 2010. They came out and they said, okay, yes, that we basically are saying if you use an LLC as the single member owned by the public 501c3 charity, we will deem a gift to the LLC as if it were a direct gift to the charity. And therefore, all of the deductions that people were concerned would not flow through clearly now do. So a number of charities, in particular with real estate, who are worried about environmental risk or other kinds of risks, will use a single member LLC that they're the only member, typically will have only one asset in there, that they will then been used as sort of the intake bucket, and they would still be able to provide the full acknowledgement letter back to the donor. Is that what you're done? Okay, so I just want to make sure that was what you were referring to. So it gives some additional options in that space. Okay, any questions on any of this stuff? All good? Okay, moving along. I've already hit this point. So cash bad, everything else good, capital gain property. This is an important point. For all the reasons that, let's say, Coca-Cola stock, if it had zero cost basis and was worth $50,000, and the person said, I want to make a charitable gift, for all the reasons you would say, wow, that would be a great asset to use to make a charitable gift. If it's real estate or closely held business interests, it is exactly the same thing. From a tax law perspective, those are simply long-term capital gain assets. Now, it's more complex. It's more complex. You got the appraisal rules are different. All these other things are different. But from a pure tax perspective, you're able to get a full fair market value deduction for the gift and no capital gains tax at the time of sale, just like publicly traded stock. So all that makes sense. So I think that's a real key point. Okay. If any of these gifts are made to a private foundation, private non-operating foundation, during life, all I'm going to say is bad. So that would be an automatic reduction in the deduction, most always, to the lesser of the fair market value or the basis. It's going to be basis. The basis, bad. Even if you could get these assets into a private foundation, now you've got all kinds of other issues. You've got potentially excess business holdings issues. You've got liquidity issues to be able to make the payout. You've got valuation issues each year to determine what the payout is. Possible, I don't think I've ever seen that happen in my career. So possible that it would happen, but be very, very rare. That's why most all of these, I mentioned the Tulsa Foundation a couple times now, I'll bet you if they could have gotten the same benefit going into a private foundation, likely would have. And perhaps even Mark Zuckerberg's gift as well. But giving to a public charity gives them all of the public charity benefits. So in particular with illiquid assets. You can see the rest of this. Donor advised funds too are just tailor-made for these kind of gifts, because most donors who make a charitable gift don't want to give it to just one charity. They want to have multiple charities. If you want to have fun, you take a farm and you do a 20% undivided interest in that farm, 5 different chunks, and you try to give that to 5 different charities. That will be a joy. That would be a wonderful experience. You should just try that for fun. 5 different gift acceptance committees and processes, 5 different acknowledgement letters, 5 different 8283s, blah, versus 1 donation to a donor advised fund sponsor, 1 acknowledgement, 1 appraisal, 1 8283. It's sold, and then they just make the grants to the 5 organizations that they wanted to give to anyway, post-sale. So all 3 of these charities that focus specifically in this space are all donor advised fund chassis for exactly that reason. Break it in as 1 shot and then bifurcate it on the back end once liquid. So it's a straight shot to be able to do that. Okay, any questions on this stuff? Okay, well, I'll do a quick quiz. I mentioned my wife before. Anybody tell me what are the top 3 things that make people the most anxious or uncomfortable? So what's number 1 always? Public speaking. Life insurance is probably up there, but public speaking is number 1. Number 2 relates to life insurance. So what is number 2? Contemplating your own death. And I always say to my estate attorney friends, doing it on the clock in 6-minute increments at $350 an hour makes it more fun. So let's talk about death on the clock that I'm paying you to talk about. So that's on the clock. Number 3, anybody know? Moving, could be. I've had people say dental work, so that's a different issue. Asking other people for money. So public speaking, contemplating your death, asking other people for money. Those are the top 3 things that make people the most anxious or uncomfortable. So I was doing this as a spousal quiz with my wife, which she can't stand, whatever, I was doing it. And so I sort of gave her the quiz. And then I went on like some other emails. Like 2 or 3 minutes later, she's like, isn't that your job description? Like, it is. I go around the country doing public speeches, like, when you die, leave all your money to charity. I mean, like, what other job can hit all 3 anxiety-inducing street counts? And that's where all my hair went, Patty. Patty knew me. I mean, I had hair. It would just flow. No wind. It would just sit there and flow. Just all gone now. Anyway. What was that? We were so young. So young. Oh. Anyway, let's talk about appraisal stuff. So I've talked a bit about Fair market value deduction, that's so easy to just throw out. What does that mean? A qualified appraiser does a qualified appraisal. Do not mess around with the definitions, tightly defined in the code, and tightened even more as part of the Pension Protection Act, all under publication 561, sort of bullet points all this stuff right out. And they are then able to provide the valuation as of the date of the donation, and that becomes the deduction. So the fair market value as of the date of the donation becomes the fair market value. Very important planning point. The appraisal can be done as early as 60 days prior to the donation being made, so it's a prospective donation. Or, that's the earliest point, the latest point is the time the donor files his or her tax return for the year of the gift. What does that mean? If a gift were made tomorrow, the appraisal could have been done as early as 60 days ago, late June-ish, right? Or, listen to this, the appraisal could be done as late as October 15th of 2019, assuming the person extends the personal return. This is a huge planning opportunity that's important to understand. I'll go through a case study as to why, that the timing of when the appraisal is done can have a dramatically material effect on the actual value. So we'll talk about that a little bit more too. One of the key Pension Protection Act changes, there are two. One, now there's a personal penalty on the appraiser if it's an inflated value. Many still don't know that, which is very strange to me. But if you look at the Form 8283 that they complete, I swear it's like in 2-point font. You can't read any of that stuff. Basically it says if there's been a substantial or gross misstatement as to value, blah, 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 you can have a personal penalty on the appraiser for a percentage of the puffery. Say that 5 times fast. Percentage of the puffery. So if you puff it, there could be a percentage of that can be penalized to the appraiser directly. It's called the Form 8282. It's called the tattletale form, letting the IRS know what it was sold for. Used to be if they sold it within 2 years, they would complete the form. Now it's 3 years, so it extended that time period a little bit more. So be very careful about sort of the appraisal considerations overall. Qualified appraiser doing a qualified appraisal. That is critical. It's easy for the IRS to pick on a technicality. And I will tell you, this is strange. We do reviews of these qualified appraisals. I would say minimum 2/3 of the time, there would be a deficiency, a material deficiency. These have to be USPAP appraisals, typically 13 parts, and they could be minor. One we did maybe a couple weeks ago, the appraiser forgot to put his EIN number. He's like, oh, okay, no big deal. That's one of the 13 parts as part of publication 561 that is required for a qualified appraisal. You do not want to go to court under audit on that. Didn't include the bio. So you want to be very careful as to making sure it's meeting the letter of the law as it relates to qualified appraiser and appraisal.
Bryan, who pays for the qualified?
Always the donor. Always, always, always. It's the taxpayer's responsibility to pay for any appraisal to be able to substantiate the value of the deduction if the charity pays, which creates all kinds of other issues. If the charity pays, then technically when you're doing the acknowledgement letter, and normally it would say no goods or services or consideration received for the gift, value provided, blah, 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 you are providing a value back or consideration to the donor for whatever the appraisal fee was that you had paid. In my view, that creates a real sense of murkiness because the question is, who is the client? If the charity is paying, the charity is the client, but now the charity is substantiating a value for the donor. I think that creates massive issues, never mind the reduction and the deduction for the consideration provided to pay for the appraisal. So it's very, very rare for any of these, in my view, to have the charity pay for those appraisals. Yeah.
And are you also going to talk about the time frame for the appraisal to be done if that appraisal is required by the nonprofit in order to accept?
Yeah, that's a very different thing. We'll talk about more on the gift acceptance process. So I have that 2 slides from now, 1 or 2. Some charities may not require the appraisal. Some would, very often if it's based on some kind of life income, like a gift annuity or something like that. Some just have part of their gift acceptance that they actually do want to have a formal appraisal. So that would be separate. If you do that, then that's actually generally more of the charity's issue because they're doing it for their own due diligence and that they actually would want to be the client. In that case, it's possible, probably practical, for the donor then to have that appraiser update that appraisal at some future point in time, but to still meet the as early as 60 days or as late as the time the tax return is filed sort of window for the donor having done the appraisal. Yeah. I would say most charities do not require an appraisal prior to acceptance. Yeah, probably 3/4 would not, generally speaking. Any other questions on that? Good? Yes?
How many appraisals can you get?
That's a good question. How many appraisals can you get? You must be a financial advisor. How would I answer this? Can you turn that Yeah, off
if you
for a
could have
second?
done that, I wouldn't care.
I'm sure I'm already on the IRS's list anyway. I have no idea. Who knows? Okay. So let's talk about tax and legal complexity as it relates to sort of stepping back as saying, okay, we're drinking the Kool-Aid and these things sound like great gifts and more charities should be taking them in and we should be advising more clients to give these gifts. Why aren't more happening? So the first one is tax and legal complexity. What does that mean? They're a pain. So you're looking at the deeds and you're looking for title stuff and all these things, the appraisal stuff. Mainly in this space, probably 1/3 of the calls that we get don't go forward because they already have a purchase and sale agreement. So, and you can let this run because the IRS drives me crazy with this, there's an annoying rule, I get it, but it's an annoying rule, that says that if the donor already has a purchase and sale contract that's legally binding, and then the donor gives that asset to the charity, now the charity is compelled to sell that asset under the terms in the contract that the donor had previously negotiated. So the position they take is that's an assignment of income, basically saying it was baked, that gain was baked at the time that the legally binding contract was executed, and now the charity does not have full dominion and control over the gift. Like every charity wants to hold a 7% interest in a working farm in Iowa, because that's what we want to do. So then you play this game of trying to get as close to that as possible without it being a legally binding contract and still being able to make the gift. So about 1/3 of the ones that we deal with are where the donor calls and said, this is going to be so easy, it's going to be so easy. It's already under contract. The closing's set for next Wednesday. You just have to show up and pick up the check. I'm like, no. So it's way too late. So that's probably 1/3. It's called a prearranged sale. Palmer, Blake, Ferguson are the 3 sort of prevailing cases there. Generally speaking, not giving tax legal advice, in every state you can do anything under a letter of intent. So most letters of intent will say non-binding on like every other page. And as long as there's a clear sort of date trail that the donor assigned or did the grant deed or whatever, the interest over to the charity on a Monday, I don't know whether I do it on Tuesday, but we have, then on Tuesday we are entering into a purchase and sale agreement with the buyer where the charity is listed as that proportional owner on Tuesday because legally that transfer has taken place and we're signing that document or we're on the cap table or shareholders grid, then that's usually a very comfortable way to be able to do that. And if you do have that issue, then that's going to be a problem giving it to the charity. The other tax and legal complexity is private inurement and self-dealing. Is somebody gaming the system? Are you selling it to your cousin for 20% less than fair market value? It's those kinds of gamey, excess benefit kind of transaction-y kind of stuff. So you got to be very careful about that. I had a guy in New Hampshire, and I thought they were honest in New Hampshire. This is like literally the call. The call was, he said, I've got a ski house, this is my 4th house, ski house. We never use it. We used it for rental. We've depreciated it down to 0. I'd like to be able to give it away. It's worth about $400,000. I swear this was in like the first maybe 2 minutes of the conversation. Never talked to this guy before. He goes, and I want to sell it to my son for $300,000. No. He goes, oh, okay, which made me even more upset, frankly, because he already had a backup knowing I was going to say no. He goes, okay, well, how about we sell it to my son? I'll give it to you. You sell it to my son for $400,000. That'll be the appraised value. It'll be $400,000 under, and I quote, a 0% amortizing 40-year loan. No. I'm like, at least lie to me. And then I can sort of find out, it's like, wait a minute, the last name of the buyer is the same as the seller. What's going on? You know, at least I could be more Sherlock Holmes. It's like, oh, no, we want to have tax fraud, and we need you to participate in that. And they just tell me, like, all that. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. It's insane. Another one that was separate from this, I should have mentioned, if real estate has debt, that's a pain in the butt. Big, big problem, all kind of issues, bargain sale issues, unrelated business taxable income issues. Possible to do if there's really low debt, but still a pain. But I did have another guy call. This was 2007, and he was in Denver, and I cannot stand these virtual tours. I cannot stand them. So he's like, I've got this great house in downtown Denver, and I'm going to tell you all about the house. I'm like, I don't want to hear about the house. Oh, I'm going to tell you about the house. Go to this website, pull up the virtual tour. He's walking me through, told me all about how he sourced this Italian marble, wouldn't shut up about the marble, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, like 30 minutes in, he goes, okay, so it's worth about $2.1 million, but... And he said, and maybe I should have told you this. I'm like, here we go. There's a $2.7 million loan. It's in foreclosure. It's not going to the courthouse steps yet, but I'm guessing maybe another 3 to 4 months. Is this something you still want? And I thought in my mind, I didn't say it, I should have said it. I'm like, you know what I want? I want 30 minutes of my life back. I don't care about your stupid Italian marble. Could you not have led with that and saved us all a whole lot of time? No, I'm not going to do that. So... drives me crazy. Environmental issues. This is a boogeyman that all nonprofits think exists, and it doesn't. There's a level of common sense that is somehow suspended with nonprofits. They think every kind of real estate they get is going to have the gas tank that's been buried. It's going to blow up 5 minutes after they get it. It's going to go in the groundwater supply, and it's going to grow 3 eyes downstream. It's going to glow in the daytime and glow at night. They get all fired up. Oh my God, it's going to be glowing all the time. There are these people called environmental appraisers, and they're other humans just like us. And they drive out, and you always know them, and this is true because they always have a clipboard. They love clipboards. Versus a house that might be, in a very nice golf community with gated, we're going to have to do a phase 3 environmental. What? It's a $1.2 million house on the 8th fairway. A phase 3 environmental is basically taking a soil drilling to the mantle of the earth. It's pretty close to that, by the way, to figure out every animal that's ever walked across this parcel. It's like, it's on a golf course, throttle back. But charities freak out. This is going to be a weird analogy. I live in Florida, used to surf all the time, and whenever I would surf, and I got kicked out of school, by the way, for surfing, but I digress, and Canadians would all come down in the winter, and that's when the good surf was, and they would always stay on the beach, and they would always be in black Speedos, by the way, which is a very spooky thing to see on the beach, so a bunch of Canadians in black Speedos. And remember when HBO was on and had like 1 or 2 movies on a loop all summer long? Jaws was on the Canadian loop. Guarantee it. And they would say, well, how do you go out? And they always do this. How do you go out there? Like, in the water? That's how you surf. Never go in the water. You know how many people in this world die from shark attacks every year? Take a guess. It's half of one in the world. Now, a lot of people are chopped up. That's not good. But half of one, it's not like they got the top half and the bottom half's walking around. It's like every other year somebody dies. What am I seeing on the backs of these Canadians when they're so worried about the sharks? 3rd degree sunburn on top of 4th degree sunburn on top of 3rd degree sunburn. 48,000 people die every year in Florida from skin cancer. You get the point. My joke is I would rather ride on the back of the shark than to go on the beach with no, sunblock. They're focused on the wrong thing. This is the shark for charities. They're just, we're going to get eaten, we're going to get eaten. It just, you could use some common sense.
The room that we're standing in used to be a gas station, and the land was donated, and there was a big tank under the ground. It set the project back in here.
Oh, that would do it. Now, if you knew there was a gas station here, okay.
They were to have taken the tank out, but they didn't, and we found that out in the process of building it.
Well, and you mentioned that. We actually helped receive, I didn't have this on my weird list, the oldest known gas station in New Jersey, which is in Princeton, New Jersey, for the Princeton Area Community Foundation. And I'll never forget reading this engineer's report, which you're an engineer, I know, very strange thing. It said, we knew that there were 6 gas tanks that were on this property. And the engineer's report from like 1956 said more than 4 were removed. I swear to God, it said like, What does that mean? You can't add up more than 4? It's like, we're all 6 removed? I don't know. What do you mean more than 4? 6 were buried, more than 4 removed. It's like, I don't know what's going on. So that was a problem. And I mentioned common sense. I'll say this story really quick because I think it's funny. So I was in Atlanta for a long time, and we've got, all these big company foundations and stuff. So there was a hospital, and they were doing a big capital campaign. And they waited way too long to get the grant request in to UPS, world headquarters for UPS. And they had a senior executive on the hospital board to sort of finish out this campaign, so the whole thing was lining up. They took too long. So this is just painful to say. So they finished the grant request. They gave it to, I'm sure, some assistant or intern or somebody. And they used the term, overnight this to the UPS Foundation. Now, if they used the appropriate overnight vendor, wouldn't be a story, would it? So FedEx was chosen, I am not making this up, to deliver overnight a 7-figure grant request. Oh, it gets so much better. Signature required, because that's what you got to do. For the president of the UPS Foundation had to sign. And everybody I tell that story to, everybody says, oh, did they get the grant? I have no clue if they got the grant. My THC brain immediately jumps into the FedEx driver's head. Do they even sleep? I don't know. They wake up at like 2 a.m. or something. And you can see them like getting up. It's like, oh, Sally's bagel thing, Johnny's florist, UPS World Headquarters. What? That's not a normal route stop for me. Extra shiny truck that day and pressing the stuff. And then you're sure, he's pulling in 15 miles an hour. That seems fast. Let's take it down to like 5 with his big other duties as assigned. They love that little catch-all phrase. So all the stuff that the donor's having to do, somebody needs to talk about who's going to do that with the charity too. So that's the management issues. The charity's internal process is the sun to my Canadians, not the Greater New Orleans Foundation. It is smooth as butter. But all other foundations, to me it's funny. They will always create, it's like a law, a gift acceptance committee because it sounds so formal. It's the worst thing you can ever do. There always has to be 4 to 6 people. I don't know why, it's 4 to 6. And they always put on successful people. Many of you probably serve on these committees. They're horrible, horrible committees. So I always say, let's walk, the bouncing ball here. Let's say that charity got a call today, right now, they got a call to say, I'd like to give you some real estate. And the charity will say, oh, good, let's get our gift acceptance committee together. How long will it take them, and I'm being very serious, to get the gift acceptance committee together? 4 to 6 people, a quorum. A week? 2 weeks? 2 to 3 weeks is more normal. Why would you never want to put successful people on there? Because they always travel. I'm not making this up. They're always traveling. So to get them all even on the phone together, it takes 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, let's bounce along here. So 2 to 3 weeks later, you get them on the phone. You go through the case. There'll be one very well-intentioned volunteer. What happens on this real estate when the blimp comes over and they're looking at the New Orleans football game? What happens if it crashes into our parcel? Let's look into insurance and make sure we're covered if that happens. Like, what are you talking about? So you come up with 47 questions, half of which are crazy questions. This is all exactly how it works. You take all those back to the donor. How long does it take the donor to answer all those questions? Maybe a week if you're lucky. But you can't set up the next gift acceptance committee yet, can you? Because you don't know how long it's going to take to do. Are you following the ball? So now it's another 2 to 3 weeks. You will never make a decision at that second meeting. Ever. So you'll go through one more cycle. It takes the average charity 2.5 to 3 months to make a decision to accept property or not. Remember what I said, 75% of the gifts that we get are fractional interest gifts. What does that mean? They've already verbally negotiated the sale of the mothership. They're in an LOI stage, and they have some good advisor say, if you ever want to be charitable, if you can spell charitable, if your kid's going to be charitable, now is the time. You've got low-cost basis, highest appreciation stock, dump it. Dump over 5%, 20% now. And then the charity comes back and said, 2.5 to 3 months we'll get back to you. They're going to go, what? I'm not saying to force fit that, but I am saying that you can really have 3 questions. If it's real estate, you call a good broker. How much is it going to sell for if we got to get this thing sold within 4 months? What are the impediments to be able to get this thing sold? Those are the only 2 pieces of information you need to know. Why that takes 2.5 months, I do not understand. But it's the process. That is the sun. Perceived real risk reward ratio, what does that mean? Is the juice worth the squeeze?
And
Yeah.
having a limited liability
Can help with a lot of that. Yes,
answers.
it can. It can. We've even taken brownfields into charitable remainder trusts with no intention of ever having life income, just to have the trustee as the donor sell it within the charitable remainder trust and then collapse the trust and then dump it out so that all of the liability stays inside the trust or with the trust. But exactly. The perceived real risk reward ratio, this is the juice worth the squeeze? Here are the big three. Don't ever allow your clients to give a timeshare. Ever. Stop calling charities about stupid timeshares. They always want to tell you it's floating, red week number red. I don't care what it is. It's in Hawaii. I don't care. I'm going to spend 20 hours a week, this is 100% true, for the next 6 months of my life, and I'm going to get $458.18 at the end of that little gauntlet. Doesn't matter what goes in the top part of that funnel, that's what I'm going to get, period. 2, nothing that eats. If it consumes food, that's not going to be good. We've done a quarter horse at Keeneland. There was, Ohio State took in $180,000 worth of bull semen, so maybe. Am I expanding your university that said they got notified there's going to be a $10 million bequest and a state gift. But when the executor called, they said, look, you're going to get this, but you have to take everything. Like, oh boy, what does that mean? 180 ostriches as part of an ostrich farm. And he said, we drove out there, and he goes, you think they're mean? He goes, oh, they are crazy mean. He goes, they've got like 12-foot fences and electrified. He goes, those things are, you don't want to get close to them. And I said, what did you do? He's like, I shouldn't tell you this. He said, but their school has a culinary program. He said, so we harvested the ostriches. And he goes, and you know how in college when you would go into the cafeteria, it was always mystery meat? He goes, no mystery meat. It was ostrich. He said it was about 8 months it took us to go. It was like the Bubba Gump thing, you know, it's like fried ostrich, ostrich gumbo, you know, it's like all ostrich stuff. I think that's very funny. Vehicle rules 2004, IRS just clamped down on that big time, bad for those. And the final thing, the only thing worse than all of those, and you'll all agree it's worse, cemetery plot. Nothing worse than a cemetery plot. You will never get that off the books of the charity, ever. I would make a suggestion, this will sound weird and creepy, but a lot of charities aren't giving their staffs big bonuses or extra benefits these days. There are like 3 of you who are as creepy as I am, and I'm going right where you think I'm going to go. So when you're doing raise and review for the oldest person on staff, because on a present value, if you use time value money, it's a little less creepy. On a present value basis, she's going to die before everybody else. So on a present value basis, Mary, job well done this year. We don't have a lot of money to give you a bonus, but we can give you eternal peace under the big oak tree. You bonus out the cemetery plot. Job well done. In all honesty, that's the only way you're ever getting it off your balance sheet if you have any kind of cemetery plots at all. So,
Or time capsule.
or you have a time capsule? You might want to tighten up your gift acceptance committee. So we got gas stations and time capsules. That's interesting.
It was actually our idea.
Oh, okay. That was a self-induced wound. Okay, I get it. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple case studies here. We got 12, 13 minutes. Any other questions so far? Okay. Charitably inclined, and they're trying to figure out what can we do to sort of make this whole process work from an efficiency standpoint. Want to get some lifetime income at this point out of their estate for estate tax purposes. This was done in 2007. So there are 2 things that are very strange about this right out of the gate. What's the first thing that's very odd? You're like, that's just weird. So what's the first? It should be obvious. Charitably inclined doctors? Yes, very strange. So every survey that's ever come out, if you could spell healthcare, you're the worst giver ever. That's true. Before you laugh too much, not to yell at you, this always hurts my evaluations, professional advisors are second worst. So you are the second worst givers by profession. I find it interesting, you may or may not, that of the second worst, the most charitable of the second worst are financial advisors, insurance agents, bankers, attorneys, and CPAs. That is the pecking order of the second worst. Here's the good news. Doctors are so far behind you, it's like NASCAR. They're like 80 laps behind you. If your giving goes down 30%, you're still second worst. So they're not nipping at your heels or anything. You're in good second worst place, so generally speaking. This is all true, by the way. So what's the second thing that's very odd about this fact set? Doctors with a good investment. So I found them too. They love limited partnerships. If you want to make a ton of money, you want to create a limited partnership in a far-off place like New Zealand, selling weird animals like emus. If you're selling limited partnership interests at the New Zealand emu farms at the AMA convention, you will do very well. So as a profitable suggestion that I'm giving to you. So here's what we did. There was a REIT out of Charlotte. Every year they called the doctors and said, we'd like to buy your medical building, and you do a leaseback. Sale, leaseback, sale, leaseback. And every year the doctor said no, because what is their cost basis on a building they bought in 1974? 0. So they said, if we're going to sell our medical practice and sell this, that is not going to work out well. So long story short, the junior doctor said, you better not sell this building out from under us, because this is where we're going to have all the patients have been coming for 40 years. And they said, tell you what, why don't you go out with the REIT group from Charlotte, and you guys go out for beer and barbecue. After work was not lunch. You guys verbally negotiate what? A long-term lease with reasonable terms, which is what both wanted. They verbally agreed to that. They came back and they said, okay, we do have long-term lease, reasonable terms, just again verbally. So how would this work? So we ended up, I'll do this one, we ended up taking a 20% undivided interest of the building and put that into 4 community foundation donor advised funds. So they get a full fair market value deduction for that part of the gift. They then took another 20% interest into 4 charitable remainder trusts. They were not all 7%. I only had so much room for so many boxes. But that 20% then went to a remainder trust. You know how that works. It can then be sold, no capital gains taxes, reinvested, and then they would get 7%. It's between 6 and 8%, back as long as they lived. 3 of the 4 had the remainder interest of the trust pour right into their donor advised funds at the community foundation. 1 went over to East Carolina Medical University to top off a professorship that he had set up over there, an endowed professorship. So a very key point, if they gave away 40%, how much did they hold back? 60. And the math, I wish it would work out this way, it didn't. But the 100% donor advised fund deduction, that was about a 20 to 25% deduction for the remainder trusts. Once you add up all of those deductions on the blue side of the equation, it helped wash out almost all of the gain that they had on the 60% that they held back. It was between about an 8 and 12% tax slippage that they had to recognize. So it was almost tax neutral. Does all that make sense? They were using the lowest cost basis, highest appreciation asset they had. They were able to get lifetime income. They pre-funded all of their retirement giving using that asset that they could now use their donor advised fund. It was all out of their estate for estate tax purposes. And then the junior doctors were very comfortable moving forward because they could now execute a long-term lease under reasonable terms, and then they did a 5-year medical practice buyout. So sort of earn out over the 5-year period. Anybody have any questions about any of that? None of that's that complicated at all, but just showing that you can use illiquid assets to fund both current giving and life income giving. Very, very important point here. Remember, I keep talking about fair market value. When we're giving 20% interest in things, what do you automatically think of? Discounts. What kind of discounts? Marketability and control. This is important. Remember I said you could have the appraisal done as early as 60 days prior to the gift, but as late as the time you file your tax return for the year of the gift. In this case, we knew, wasn't binding, we knew, the REIT was going to come in and buy it for $6 million. So we had suggested, wait to do the appraisal. Don't get all excited and get that appraisal done early. Wait until the sale takes place. It was supposed to be about 4 months. It took about 5 months, but 5 months later the sale took place. Then hire the qualified appraiser to do the qualified appraisal. Now there's been a material event. They get all excited when you say that, by the way. They're very geeky. Ooh, what was it? What was it? It sold last Tuesday for $6 million. Here's the settlement statement. Here's where the Charitable Remainder Trust got $1.2 million, and here's where the Donor Advised Fund got $1.2 million. What do you think the appraisal came back at? $6 million. Now, there are a number of things that could be done. Some people say, well, you don't know because it wasn't a completed deal yet at the time. They use what's called an arbitrage discount. Very often we use put options, 2-page put option. Be able to put it back at the full fair market value to the donor. That immediately removes typically the marketability discount. And in other cases, you'd say to the appraiser, why don't you use a cap rate valuation based on the lease rate to derive? When you do that, there are no discounts at all. Does that make sense? Very often a marketability or control discount would be 30%. That'd be very typical, as you know. What's 30% on a $2.4 million gift? It's $800,000 that otherwise would be lost. Instead, waiting until after the sale and or doing some additional papering on the front end can almost always remove all or close to all of what that discount would be if that is the goal. Does all that make sense? It's a big deal is when that appraisal is sort of done and how that's documented. Okay. The final case study here is on S-Corps. So this one I want to hear clapping, and I'm going to do it in 5 minutes. So here we go. Better hear clapping or I'll tell Lake Charles you guys were bad. So there are more S-Corps than C-Corps and LLCs combined. I thought LLCs would be cannibalizing more S-Corps. They're still growing. LLCs growing fast too, but S-Corps still growing. So if somebody said, I have a privately held business, the odds are very good it's an S-Corporation. Annoyingly, prior to 1998, if a charity owned an S-Corporation stock, it would automatically terminate the S-election, so it never happened. 1998, a law was passed allowing charities to own S-Corporation stock, but, and here's the hammer blow, the charity has to take a carryover tax basis from the donor. So then when the charity actually sells the stock, let's say it's $1 million of stock and the basis is 0, to keep the math simple, that the charity has to pay unrelated business taxable gain and any allocated income after the charity actually owns it, any K1 income. Is everybody with me there? So here's where the magic comes in. Normally, it's best just for the donor in that case to sell the stock him or herself at the 20% rate. There might be a state tax, there might be net investment income tax. But we have, and there are others, a structure that is a donor-advised fund in trust form. Formed it 11 years ago. There are multiple other options that are out there too, specifically to mitigate the UBIT on S-Corp stock. So we've done, I think, $48 million of S-Corp stock this summer, just in the last 80 days. So a lot of S-Corp stock. And here's how it works. So let's say, again, it's $1 million of S-Corp stock. The stock then goes over to the public charity. It's a donor-advised fund, 501c3 public charity. The charity receives that stock. The donor has the qualified appraiser do the qualified appraisal, says it's worth $1 million as of that date. That's the deduction, fair market value deduction. The charity then sells the stock the next day, just keeping the math simple here. Here I'm assuming a $200,000 cost basis. $800,000 of that is immediately recognized as long-term gain at trust rates. Trusts distinguish, as you know, between ordinary income and capital gain, unlike corporate income. So that would be at 20% rate. Ours is in Nevada, you see up there, because all good things seem to happen in Nevada. That's kind of a bad joke, but anyway. So no state income tax. Constitutionally, it's the only state in the union where they can never constitutionally have an income tax. Interesting little trivia item. So we would then pay a 20% long-term gains tax, no 3.8% tax. That never applies to any charitable gifts. No state income tax, as I mentioned. It gets so much better. This is where you want to start warming your hands up for the clapping. So now we have 20% capital gains, but now under the new tax law, when we then take all of the proceeds and grant it right back to the Greater New Orleans Foundation for a designated fund or an unrestricted fund or a donor-advised fund, we receive, because in essence, you're not a charity for the purposes of that transaction, you're a taxable trust. That's what UBIT basically is. So when we fill out our tax return, we actually have this beautiful, beautiful box that says, have you made any charitable gifts to other charities? And we say, yes, we have. We just made a gift over to the Greater New Orleans Foundation. It says, oh, okay, was it a cash gift? It was a cash gift because we've already sold it. 60% of AGI deduction at the trust level for a gift of cash to another public charity. Our effective net tax rate then goes from 20% to 8%. The clapping is supposed to start now. Yes. Not robust, but okay. The point is, for many advisors, they would say, for my clients giving S-Corp stock, that may not be a good tax strategy. We see this all the time where the full fair market value deduction, you can't get rid of all the tax, but you get it down to 8%. That's even assuming zero basis. Most charities charge a 2% or so fee, so it's usually about a 10% all-in toll for 90 cents on the dollar to end back up over at their advised fund or whatever charity they were trying to give it to in the first place. The other cool thing we do a lot with S-Corp stock is charitable gift annuities. So S-Corps going into CRTs is nuclear. It is bad on so many levels, 100% UBIT tax. To gift annuities, we drive the tax down to 8%, then issue the gift annuity on the net amount, and then all the remainder goes back to the community foundation. So more than you want to know. But S-Corps, the theme here, in play. All I want you to think about now, cash bad, everything else good. My only goal was to stretch your thinking across the balance sheet well beyond publicly traded stock. We talked about bull semen and NFL teams and all kind of other stuff. So lots more on the table here for your charitably inclined clients who want to be able to have the most impact possible using the most tax optimal assets they have, in many cases by design, are closely held business interests in real estate. Last key point, I picked on doctors, I picked on you. And I'm totally serious about this. I don't care what community I'm in this entire country. I don't care. Salina, Lake Charles, here, don't care. The most charitably inclined people always closely held business stock, real estate. Always. Not a trick question. What do real estate people own? I don't know. Real estate. What do closely held business people own? Closely held, and they are usually the two most cash poor kind of clients and investors you have. So you can use their assets that they have the most of, and they're the most charitably inclined to be able to help them make those kinds of gifts. So with that, I will close. Thank you so much. I hope it's been helpful.
To all of you for being here. And you have in your blue folder, please take it with you, my card. And we're happy to be your partner on gifts like the ones Bryan talked about today. We hope you'll stay with us for a little while longer. Grab a drink in the lobby. Bryan's going to hang out with us there. We have some snacks and some drinks for you, and hope to speak with you there. Thanks.